Now that we're familiar with the HTML5 canvas element, we're going to be making a clock. So this will show us how far we can go with the skills that we learned in the previous video. It's actually an idea that I got from the W3 Schools website that I thought was really cool, and so this is what we're going to be making in this video. It does have some reasonably complex maths in it, so be prepared to watch my video if you haven't done maths for quite a while, because you do need to work out some angles and also lengths from, say, the center to the number 1 to make the numbers and hands appear in the right place. But other than that, all of the skills are what we covered in the previous video. So I'll give you a moment to pause the video and try and recreate what you've got in front of you here. Best of luck. Okay, hope you managed to have a good stab at that. So let's start by setting up our canvas. So I'll give it an ID of clock and a width of 500 and a height of 500 as well. And then we'll add our scripts. Let's not forget a quick message, just in case the user is using an old browser. And then let's create our canvas variable, which is going to be document.getElementById clock, and also our context. So that's canvas.getContext 2D. I also want a variable to specify the radius of my clock, which is simply going to be half the width of the canvas. So let's use clock radius, and we'll put that equal to canvas.width divided by 2. And because I like to check these things, let's just alert the value of the radius. Yep, 250. Perfect. All right, and now let's draw the clock circle. So we'll do this using context.beginPath. Then we'll set up our arc. And this is going to have a center of clock radius, clock radius, which is the center of our canvas. A radius of clock radius. And we're going to start at 0 and go all the way around. So 2 times pi. And then we want to draw it, but this time we don't want to just have an arc, we want to fill it in. So we'll use context.fill. All right, let's have a look. There we go. That looks good. Now for the tricky part, the numbers. So we're going to do this with text. So let's use context.font. And let's try making this about 1/10 of the radius in terms of pixels. We might need to tweak that a little bit. Let's use clock radius divided by 10 and then plus pixels and Arial. And then we'll need to set the fill style to white. And the challenge here is going to be getting the positioning right. I'm going to use 2 layout instructions to make my life a little bit easier. First one is text align, which is center. So that will make the text aligned at the center of the horizontal position where I put it. And we can do the same with the vertical position using text baseline is middle. So this will essentially put the text in the center horizontally and vertically of where I put it rather than at the bottom left. And for now, we'll just start with the 12. So let's pop that in. So context.fillText 12. And we'll put it just at the center of the circle for the moment. So that's clock radius, comma, clock radius. And there we go. Now the 12, of course, we want to appear up here. So for the 12, the x coordinate is already correct, but the y coordinate needs to be decreased by a little bit less than the clock radius. So I'm going to subtract clock radius times 0.9 from that to get it near the top. All right, now that was the easy one. The tricky one is going to be the next one, so the 1 essentially. So this is where we're going to need our maths. So let's copy what we've got so far, but this time we want the 1. Now, if you imagine a line going from the center of the circle to where we want our 1 to be, that line has a length of clock radius times 0.9, because it's a little bit less than the clock radius. And essentially we want to work out the vertical distance from the center to that point and the horizontal distance. And that's where we use sine and cos. If you manage to look those up and figure out how to use them, then congratulations. If not, don't worry about it. It's quite mathematically specific. Essentially, the up movement is going to be this length multiplied by cos of the angle. And the horizontal movement is going to be this length multiplied by the sine of the angle. So let's try and get that right. So for the horizontal, we want to add on, and I think I'll make it longer here, clock radius multiplied by, here we want math.sine of the angle, which is 2 times math.pi, which remember is all the way round, but we only want to go 1/12 of the way round, so we're going to divide that by 12. And I actually want to multiply the clock radius by 0.9 because I only want to go 9/10 of the way out to the numbers rather than to the edge. So that looks good. Looks like it's moved it along about the right amount. We now want to move it down the right amount as well. So it's actually pretty similar to before, that instead of subtracting just clock radius times 0.9, which would take it vertically up, we subtract clock radius times 0.9 times cos of the angle. So that's multiplied by math.cos 2 times math.pi divided by 12, because we're dividing the full circle into 12 equal parts. Phew! So don't worry too much if you didn't follow all the maths going on there. This is the point at which you should be able to carry on and finish the challenge, even if you're not 100% clear on how the sine and cos come into the whole thing. All right. So obviously we don't want to have 12 different lines of code to do this. We want to do this with a nice loop. So let's use a for loop, and we'll start off with I is equal to 1. And we want to keep going as long as I is less than or equal to 12. And we want to increment I by 1 each time. And then we're going to use this line of code where we're going to take, instead of 1, we want to use I. And we're also going to need to increase the angle each time. So we're just going to multiply that by I, which will take us further and further round the clock. And similarly here. multiplied by I. All right, then, fingers crossed. Let's take a look. Wonderful. So now we have our lovely clock face. Now that all remains is the hands. And we actually don't need that 12 anymore either. So we're going to need to get the time. But fortunately, we can get that from JavaScript pretty easily. So we'll get the number of hours. And we'll do that from a new date dot get hours. We'll get minutes, which is another new date dot get minutes. And we'll get seconds as well, which will be new date get seconds. Now, seconds is pretty straightforward because it's just between 0 and 60. Minutes is also pretty straightforward because it's between 0 and 60. But hours is not quite that straightforward. And that's because not only is it in a 24-hour format, but we also need to incorporate the number of minutes in it as well, because we do want to move it around between the 3 and the 4, say, as we get closer and closer to 4 o'clock. So let's create a variable full hours. And first off, we need to get it from a 24-hour to 12-hour. Now, the easy way to do that is to take hours and use %12 to get the remainder when hours is divided by 12. And so if hours is less than 12, it will remain the same. If it's more than 12, essentially we're subtracting 12 from it to get from, say, 23 to 11. And then we need to add to that the number of minutes, which is just minutes divided by 60, because we need to get that in hours. And then for full accuracy, we should also do seconds divided by 3,600, the number of seconds in an hour. Next, we need to get the angle for each of these. So let's have a variable hours angle. This is going to be the angle of the hour hand from 12 o'clock, which is actually reasonably straightforward. We just get the number of hours, so full hours, and then multiply that by the number of angles for 1 hour. And 1 hour is 2 times math.pi, which is all the way around a circle, divided by 12, because it's a 12th of the way around the circle. Similarly, we'll do minutes angle, and that's going to be minutes times 2 times math.pi divided by 12. And seconds angle is going to be the same. So that's just seconds times 2 times pi divided by 12. And then to draw, say, the hour hand, we'll use context.move2, and then we want to start at the center of the circle, which is clock radius, comma clock radius. So halfway along, halfway down. And then we want to draw a line 2, and this is the tricky bit again. So I'll expand outwards. Essentially, we're going to want the same thing that we had here. So on the horizontal, we want exactly the same as that, except instead of moving this angle around, we want to move the hours angle around. And then for the y coordinate, we want to use again the same as before. So clock radius to get to the center minus clock radius times 0.9 times cos of the angle. So hours angle. And then we want to draw the line. So context dot stroke. And a couple of quick things there. Firstly, I think I've missed a bracket off, and we also need to set the stroke style, because otherwise it's going to be black, so we won't see it on top of the clock face. So I just set it to white. And one more quick change as well. I think we'll need to have a variable for the date rather than grab the hours, minutes and seconds directly from the new date function. And a small thing as well, I've forgotten the brackets after these functions. Let's pop those in. And I've just noticed there that I've got content rather than context. Not my finest hour, but there we go. Let's run it and give it a shot. There we go. That's looking good. And that is about the right time. It's 2:51 here. So a couple of things. We definitely want to make that a little bit shorter. In fact, the hour hand is usually quite a bit shorter. So let's make that about 0.6. And I think a little bit thicker as well. So we'll use context dot line width. And let's say 5. See how that looks. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Let's add in now the minute hand. So I'll use all of this code again. This time we'll make it a little bit thinner, a little bit longer, and we'll change, well, maybe 0.8 actually, and we'll change hours angle to minutes angle, and here as well. All right, let's take a look. Okay, that's looking good. And then we'll do the same for the second hand. So we'll make it a bit narrower again. And then we want seconds angle and seconds angle. And there we go. I think I'll just make the seconds angle line a little bit longer. So maybe we'll go all the way out to 0.9. Lovely. And then before we make the clock work, I think it looks a little bit ugly in the middle there. So I'm just going to add a small circle in the middle to tidy that up a touch. So let's add another path and then have an arc. And let's just try 20 pixels. And we'll need the fill style to be white at that point. So actually I can move that up here to before we draw that circle. So let's take a look. There we go. That does look a little bit tidier. I think I'll just make it a bit smaller. Maybe 10. There we go. Much better. And I've just noticed something slightly strange with our hands. They do sort of pop all over the place a little bit. I think that's because even though there are 12 hours in a full turn, there are 60 minutes. And of course, 60 seconds. So that looks much better. Brilliant. So all that remains is to get this to update every second rather than just when the page is refreshed. But that's easily done. All we need to do is set this whole thing up as a function. So we might call it set time. And then we want that function to be called every second. So we use set interval and then set time every 1000 milliseconds. And one final change that we'll need there is to set the fill style to black just before the clock face is drawn, otherwise it will still be white from drawing the hands. Okay, let's have a look. That's looking great. Fantastic. That takes us to the end of the Canvas challenge, but now we're going to move on to just assorted HTML5 cool features that we can use in our websites before we look in a bit more detail at CSS3.